The exchange sacrifice was as common in Petrosian's games as the tactical sacrifice was in Tal's games. When once asked which of the chess pieces his favorite was, Petrosian replied half-jokingly that it was the rook, because he could sacrifice it for minor pieces. Hello chess lovers, Suren here, and in this video I want to share with you the famous 7th game of 1966 Petrosians Spassky World Chess Championship Match. In this game Spassky had white pieces and he opened up with d4, which came as a surprise for Petrosian. Before this, Spassky was usually opening up with e4. The previous 3 games he started with e4, to which Petrosian responded with Caro-Kann defense, and those games ended up in a draw. But this time he chooses to push forward his queen's pawn and we have d4. I have to tell you that at this point the match score was equal, both players had 3 points. Petrosian responded with knight f6, knight f3 e6 and bishop g5. Spassky is going for Torre attack. Before this, Spassky had played this line 3 times with a perfect score, but choosing this line against Petrosian is not really a good idea, because Petrosian knows these variations very well, and as someone remarked, Spassky is inviting Petrosian to play in the yard of the house in which he grew up. d5 by Petrosian, knight bd2, bishop e7, e3, knight bd7, bishop d3, c5, c3, b6, white castled kingside, bishop b7, knight e5, and knight takes e5. Yes, black is getting rid of white's central knight as quickly as possible, and then after d takes e5 we have knight d7. Black is offering the exchange of dark squared bishops, and also the knight is keeping an eye on e5 square. Bishop f4, so Spassky is deciding to keep alive the dark squared bishop and is protecting the pawn on e5. But at this point it was better to go for the exchange of dark squared bishops and play f4. Instead, in our game we have bishop f4. Queen c7 by Petrosian is attacking the pawn and also is preparing castling queenside. But I have to tell you that the problem with bishop f4 is that this allows an immediate pawn storm on the king side. Yes, black can go for a kingside pawn push with a tempo by playing g5, if bishop g3 then h5. Yeah, and only then queen c7. A similar idea we are going to see in our game, but Petrosian would go for it only by losing a precious time. We first see queen c7, and after white's knight f3 we have h6, so Petrosian is preparing g5 move. b4, understanding that black wants to castle queenside, Spassky is making a pawn sacrifice in order to open up the c file, but Petrosian is not even paying attention to the sacrificed pawn and he proceeds with his idea, g5, bishop g3, and this time we have h5. Yes, it's not really good to accept the pawn sacrifice. After knight d4, white is getting a nice position, and then rook c1 can follow. I don't know, knight b5. Yeah, white has a compensation, that's why in our game we have h5 and h4 by Spassky. Later Mikhail Tal would suggest h3 with the idea of if g4, then after h takes g4, h takes g4, play knight d4, and only Mikhail Tal was capable of offering such a crazy line when playing during the World Chess Championship match. The idea is that now once white is managing to open up the c file, black king can no longer feel safe on the king side. But of course, this is a very hazardous approach, and instead we have h4 by Spassky. A more solid continuation is on the board. G takes h4, bishop f4, and finally Petrosian castled queenside. Finally, on move 16, he is connecting the rooks and is ready to throw all his forces at white's kingside. a4, and after thinking for 20 minutes, Petrosian came up with c4 move. A move which surprised the spectators, because by playing c4, white is surrendering a very essential d4 square, a square where white can both put his knight and also a queen. But the thing is that using this square is not an easy task for white. For example, you can't put your knight on d4 because the knight should always safeguard the pawn on e5, and yes, making use of this hole is not an easy task. That's why, after a long thought, Petrosian finally made c4 move, bishop e2. Instead of playing bishop e2, Spassky was also considering bishop f5 move, with the idea of if he takes f5, then e6. But of course, black is not forced to accept the piece sacrifice, and to bishop f5, black has a very beautiful d4 answer. Right now, knight takes d4 is not good because after he takes f5, e6, black has knight e5 move. That's why after d4, white should play c takes d4, and only then black can capture on f5. If e6, then queen c6, and again, black is doing better. But the thing is that Spassky didn't go for this line, because after bishop f5, now if black plays rook g8, then white should move back his bishop on h3, and the bishop feels like to be a big pawn, although on h3 it can play a very important defensive role. I have to tell you that in both Spassky's and Petrosian's analysis there was no word about d4 when playing bishop f5. But anyways, let's proceed with our game. So after c4 we have bishop e2 and a6, a strong move by Petrosian. Now b5 can be made with a5 and a5 with b5. In both cases, black is locking up the queen side. King h1, white is making a prophylactic move, and there comes the rook. Rook g8, rook g1, rook g4, black wants to double up his rooks. Queen d2, rook h g8, a5, and b5, no problem at all for black. There is no counterplay for white on the queen side. Rook a d1, bishop f8. Black wants to play bishop g7 and target this vulnerable pawn on e5. Knight h2, but instead of thinking about moving away his rook, Petrosian made knight takes e5 move. As you know, exchange sacrifice was Petrosian's trademark, and he goes for it, guys. After thinking for 7 minutes, an exchange sacrifice is on the board. All white could do was to accept the rook sacrifice, and then we have h takes g4. Black's attack looks very scary and white has no counterplay. e4, a cunning move by Spassky. The idea is that now if d takes e4, then bishop takes e5, relying on the back rank weakness. But Petrosian cold-heartedly responded with bishop d6, queen e3, knight d7. This was a surprise for those who were in the press room. They were expecting d takes e4, but Petrosian thought that this bishop can play a very important defensive role. That's why, by offering the exchange of dark squared bishops, is getting rid of it. Bishop takes d6, queen takes d6, rook d4. f4 could lead to a tougher resistance, but in our game we have rook d4, and there comes the e-pawn e5. Yes, rook d4 is not really good because this is allowing black to push forward his pawns with the tempo. And then we have f5. So this is move 30, and still we have all 8 black pawns on the board, right guys? This is insane. The last 2 pawn moves may well have been inspired by Nemtsovic's famous expression of the pawns lost to expand. As Max Ave said, Petrosian is a great master of pawn play, and yes, we have something very special going on the board. He takes d5. Well, if he takes f5, then simply queen f6. In our game, we have e takes d5, and there comes the f-pawn, f4. Queen e4. Of course, queen a7 won't give you anything. There is not much the queen can do. The queen is just trapped on a7, you know. e4 can follow. Then h3 can come. Yeah, this is very scary. In our game, we have queen e4, knight f6. Queen f5 check, king b8, f3. Well, in here white could offer the exchange of queens, but even this can't help white. And then knight e4 is coming. The game is over. In our game after king b8 we have f3 and bishop c8. First kicking away the queen, queen b1, g3. And now this bishop can also support the h-pawn. Rook e1. There comes the h-pawn, h3. Now if g takes h3, then g2 check followed by queen d7. That's why in our game we have bishop f1 and rook h8. G takes h3, bishop takes h3, king g1. In here if you go for bishop takes h3, then of course rook takes h3 is also winning, but queen d7 is of course very strong. Switching the queen into the attack is just winning on the spot. In our game after bishop takes h3 we have king g1 and bishop takes f1. King takes f1. Well, if rook takes f1, then again queen d7 is winning. In our game we have king takes f1, trying to move away the king from the dangerous territory, but there is no way out. Here comes the e-pawn. What's going on the board, guys? If f takes e3, then f3 can follow with rook h1 mating threat. In our game after e4 we have queen d1 and another marvelous move by Petrosian, knight g4. Black is not only switching his knight into the attack, but also is freeing the 6th rank for the queen. For example, now if rook takes e4, then queen h6 can follow. In our game white accepted the piece sacrifice, and there comes the f-pawn, f3. The threat is rook h1 checkmate. Here Spassky made a desperate rook g2 move, but after f takes g2 check he finally resigned. If king takes g2, then rook h2 check followed by queen h6, or if king e2, then queen f4. If you cover the f2 square, then queen f3 check can follow, and then queen f2 check. Yeah, the game is over. That's why finally on move 43, after f takes g2 check, Spassky resigned. This is by no means a perfect game and one of the most beautiful games ever played at World Chess Championship matches. Here is what Petrosian said about this masterpiece. One of my best games. It demonstrates my creative views, the utmost restriction of the opponent's possibilities, strategy over the entire board, the surrounding of the enemy king and the gradual tightening of the encirclement around it. Well, in the end, let's also solve a chess puzzle where the task is to find the winning move for white. It's white to move, and I will wait for your answer in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Here are more suggestions for you. Feel free to check them out as well. I will see you in my next video. Take care.